What I'm about to tell you is the strangest experience I've ever lived through. My name is Mary, and my friend Carol and I were driving from Florida to New Jersey a few months back. We were coming back from visiting a few friends who went to school down there. It was a really fun time, but Carol and I had to get on with our lives. The drive was supposed to be fun, a little road trip, just us two with a bunch of snacks, music, and time to catch up on all the things we hadn't talked about in ages. In hindsight, it probably would have been a better idea to stay one more night at our friend's place, but I wanted to get home. We were planning to do the whole drive in one shot. We drove through the night and into the next morning. A few hours after the sun came up, my back started to ache from sitting in the same position for so long. I told Carol we should pull over somewhere for a break, grab some gas, and maybe find something to eat before we get back on the road. We drove past a few more exits before ultimately getting off at what claimed to be a lively, touristy town. For the life of me, I can't remember what the actual name of the town was. It was one of those places that you'd expect to be a tourist stop with signs pointing to attractions and promises of unique shops or local history. But even as we pulled in, I felt something was off. The streets were empty, and the buildings looked like they'd seen better days, a little too worn down for a place supposedly catering to visitors. It's hard to explain the feeling, but it was the kind of place where you could sense something was wrong without actually knowing what. I'm sure everyone kind of knows what I'm talking about. Have you ever driven through one of those ghost towns where all the shop signs are still up, but everything is clearly abandoned? Yeah. That's what it felt like. Only it was weirder since things weren't actually abandoned, they just looked that way. It wasn't your typical haunted kind of vibe, but strange enough that it's been on my mind ever since. The first stop was the convenience store. We actually had to drive for a decent while before entering the heart of the town, or whatever you'd call it. We pulled into a stretch and grabbed some refreshments. The two of us headed inside. It looked pretty normal in there, actually. Carol was looking for a specific drink she wanted, but quickly grew frustrated when she realized they didn't have it. She's a bit of a drama queen, so I indulged her tantrum and agreed to go somewhere else. I still wanted to get my Gatorade though, so I walked up to the counter with it to pay. The cashier was a woman, about 30 or 35 if I had to guess. She had dark brown hair and was on the taller side. Again, all very normal. The only reason I remembered her features was because she was wearing suspenders, which I wasn't used to seeing. I paid for my drink and we left. Carol pointed to another convenience store across the street, so we figured we'd give it a shot. When we walked into the second store, I literally felt my stomach drop. The cashier behind the counter looked exactly like the girl who'd been working at the first place. Same hair, same face, same height, same everything. I froze, staring at her. I could tell I was making her uncomfortable. Eventually, I asked her if she had a twin or a sister or something. She gave me a weird look, almost skeptical, said she didn't have a twin and that she was an only child. She narrowed her eyes and told me that that was a strange thing to ask, which I guess it was. I tried to explain myself, but she didn't say anything after that. I felt this weird sense of déjà vu and backed out of the store, dragging Carol along with me. Carol was confused, but I explained myself and asked if she noticed the same thing. She said she didn't remember what the other cashier looked like and that I was probably just tired from driving for so long. I knew what I saw, though, and told her I'd prove it. We ran back to the first convenience store, but when we got there, the girl inside looked nothing like who I remembered seeing. She was a completely different person. She was short, with light hair, and looked middle-aged. There's absolutely no chance anyone could have confused her for the other cashier. She didn't even look like she was in the same age range. It was as if I had imagined the whole thing. Carol told me to just forget about it and that I was tired, but I insisted that I wasn't imagining things. Eventually, I had no choice but to let it go. I was eager to get out of there, but we needed gas. We pulled into the first gas station we saw, which was void of people. It was completely empty, just our car, the pumps, and a small building at the back where you would pay. We were literally the only car in the entire lot. The two of us walked inside. Carol took her sweet time looking for her drink, but of course it wasn't there either. I paid, waited for her, and we left. We couldn't have been in there for more than a few seconds. As we walked out, I again felt a weird feeling in my gut. What had not 2 seconds ago been a completely empty gas station was now packed to the brim. The place was overflowing with people. It was the strangest thing. Cars filled every single pump, and there were even some lined up as if we'd wandered into rush hour at the busiest station in the state. All the parking spots in the back lot were full too. To make matters worse, it felt like everyone was eyeing us down as we walked to our car. I don't think I've ever felt more uncomfortable by people staring at me. This time, Carol agreed that something bizarre was going on. I could tell that both of us felt the same eerie suspicion. It was like we'd left reality for a second, and when we came back, something had shifted. We decided to say, screw it on the food, and just find our way back to the highway. I didn't have much of an appetite at that point anyway. Back on the road, we didn't say much for a while. I wasn't scared, but I just had a bad feeling in my gut. I'm not sure how to even explain it. As we got slightly further away, Carol and I talked about how weird that had just been. As we were talking, a car passed us, a Toyota Sienna with a cracked windshield. I remember it distinctly because the windshield had this big spiderweb crack running through it, and the side was scratched up pretty bad. It was kind of hard to miss. Carol made a joke about it, but I can't remember exactly what it was. Just as we were starting to loosen up, everything came crashing down again. About 10 minutes later, the exact same minivan passed us again. We were both 100% sure of it. Again, it was impossible to miss with this massive crack in the windshield. How was that even possible, though? We had been driving in a straight line at a pretty fast clip. There's no way it could have gotten ahead of us. But the odds of passing 2 different Siennas with identical cracks in the windshield were insanely slim. Carol started saying, "Oh my God," over and over again, and I could tell she was on the verge of a panic attack. She told me to speed up, which I did. I was dying inside, but I had to keep it together as the driver and for Carol's sake. I wanted nothing more than to get back on the highway and leave that place behind forever. I glanced down at the GPS and saw that an hour had somehow passed since we had left the gas station, which was virtually impossible. I wanted to tell Carol about it, but I didn't know if she could take any more weird stuff. My heart was in my throat, but I just kept driving. Part of me wondered if the GPS was going to start taking us in circles. We finally got back on the highway, and the nightmare ended there. By the time we got home, however many hours later, it felt like we were waking up from some strange, disjointed dream. I'm not kidding. That whole experience still feels like a dream when I think back to it. People usually look at me strangely when I tell them this story. I still can't explain what happened there, and I don't expect any kind of explanation. I've tried doing research online about weird occurrences in places like that, and I've actually found a handful of stories that are similar to mine. The weirdest thing about it was the feeling in my gut that I still have trouble describing. Until that point, I really didn't know what it meant to get a bad vibe from something. It's like every bone in your body is begging you to notice that something's wrong. I never want to get that feeling again. My family owns a 2012 Volvo that's honestly on its last legs. It's been through countless problems over the years, yet it still refuses to die. From brakes that feel like they're made of mush to an engine that barely cooperates, this car seems to be hanging on by a thread. The electronics barely work, and my parents are just waiting for it to finally break down so they can justify buying a new one. Unfortunately, I'm the one stuck driving it. And that's not all. On top of everything else, the windshield wipers don't work at all. Driving in the rain has become a nightmare, as even the slightest drizzle can completely obstruct my view. It's a hazard, but I have no choice but to deal with it. Nevada is known as the dry state, so rain isn't exactly a frequent problem around here. I remember back in elementary school, teachers always mentioned how rare it was for us to get rain. But this particular day, a storm hit unexpectedly. This wasn't just a light sprinkle or drizzle. This was a full-on thunderstorm, complete with lightning and torrential rain. I didn't realize it at the time, but it turned out to be one of the heaviest rainfalls we'd had in years. I've driven through rain before, but this was something else. With my windshield wipers failing, I knew there was no way I could drive through that storm. I pulled over onto a stretch of desert highway, far enough from the road to avoid being hit by oncoming vehicles. The last thing I wanted was to be caught in the middle of nowhere in a storm. It was a terrible situation, but I figured I'd wait it out, maybe try to get some sleep in the car. I debated calling the police for help, but money was tight, and I really didn't want to risk getting a ticket for anything. Plus, I wasn't going to ask my parents, who were in their mid-60s, to drive 3.5 hours to rescue me. So, I waited. Alone. In the middle of a thunderstorm, parked on the side of the road in the vast Nevada desert, the storm didn't let up for over an hour. I started to feel a little paranoid. The longer I sat there, the more my mind started to play tricks on me. Something about being alone in the desert, with nothing but miles of rocks and sand surrounding me, was messing with my head. I couldn't help but feel like something wasn't right. Just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, the storm began to subside. It wasn't over, but the intensity had lessened, and I thought I might finally be able to get back on the road. The sun was starting to set, casting an eerie glow over the desert. In other circumstances, I might have enjoyed the quiet beauty of it all. But with the rain still coming down and the feeling of isolation growing stronger, I couldn't relax. I kept my eyes on the lightning flashing in the distance, hoping it would distract me. But eventually, the rain grew quieter, and the world outside my car seemed to grow darker. Suddenly, I noticed something strange. There were flashes of white light in the distance. At first, I thought it was just lightning, but these were too sharp, too sudden. They were darting around in an unnatural way, and it didn't take long before I realized they were getting closer. Panic surged through me. I don't know why, but something instinctively told me I had to leave the car. I grabbed my phone, unlocked the door, and ran into the desert to hide behind a rock formation. It was still raining, but I didn't care. My heart was racing, and I prayed the sound of the rain would mask my breathing. Crouching behind the rock, I peered out at my car. After a few moments, I finally saw what those lights were. 3 figures, each with a flashlight, moving through the desert toward my car. They were swinging their lights around erratically, almost like they were in some sort of trance. I was terrified. They circled my car, shining their flashlights inside as if searching for something, or someone. They moved like they were on something, disoriented and unpredictable. The fear that was mounting in me intensified when one of them suddenly fired a gunshot into the air. The sound was deafening in the quiet of the desert, and I froze, my heart in my throat. Every instinct told me to stay as still as possible, hidden from sight. After what felt like an eternity, I couldn't stand it anymore. I carefully peeked out from behind the rock. The flashlights were gone. The area around my car was pitch black. I waited, not knowing where they had gone or if they were still nearby. Then, out of nowhere, the lights flickered back into view, circling my car again, like they were taunting me. I knew I couldn't stay there much longer. I shakily pulled out my phone and called, trying to explain my situation with my voice barely above a whisper. The operator assured me that help was on the way, but I didn't feel reassured. The tension in my body was unbearable. Minutes felt like hours as I watched the figures move closer to my car. Then, suddenly, I saw the faint glow of police lights in the distance. The second the officers arrived, the 3 figures disappeared into the darkness. The moment I saw the police car, I rushed out, waving my arms in relief. The officer listened as I told him everything that had happened, though he didn't seem particularly shocked. It somehow made the whole thing feel even more unsettling. He stayed with me through the storm, keeping an eye on the car while I waited for the rain to die down. At least he didn't tow my vehicle, though that was small comfort. To this day, I think about that night often, and I haven't done a road trip since. Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Nightmare Moment channel. If you found this video inspiring, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below.